Hello guys, it's David here. I'm just doing the weekly market breakdown this week, so I'll sort of break down EU and AU from the weekly down to the M15 and just sort of go through my thought process, what I'm seeing, and how I sort of go about analysing the blank chart and building the story from the higher time frames down, which is ultimately the most important part of trading in my opinion. So let's start with EU. Obviously the weekly, you don't even have anything to the left on the FX doc or on the forex.com data to compare to. So we're at the all-time lows, like that goes back to 06. So we're at the all-time lows. Obviously I think part of the reason why EU has been sort of slightly trickier the last few months is because when we were sort of in this leg down, it's sort of pretty clear that the intentions were to run this week low. So I think whenever there's clearer higher time frames intentions, evidence sort of flows easier on the lower time frames, whereas now we've had this huge sweep liquidity here, so probably like a good degree of uncertainty. Is probably like a lot of battle between supply and demand, you know, people wanting to push it lower, people trying to push it higher, and I think that's maybe why the conditions maybe been slightly trickier the last few months. But I'll just start marking this up now. So obviously I have the huge liquidity sweep that we have to be aware of. What's that there? How tight you want to map your weekly structure? I mean, yeah, it's like weekly, it takes that long to play out. Personally, I just map it quite tightly, which usually corresponds with a daily, but it's like when you're executing in the M1, predominantly trading M15 zones, trying to take advantage of 20-30 pip move, it doesn't really matter. Again, you can map it more loosely if you want, but for me the two most recent breaks of structure are here. So that's our weekly boss. So obviously that's the weekly bearish. And then you can see we pull back up to mitigate the previous range. Just mitigated those buy to sell wicks. Probably at the EQ of the leg too, if you measure that, because usually in the weekly and the daily the EQ of a pullback is quite well respected. It's like, yeah, you can see pretty much bang on the EQ of the leg, so that makes sense. Pullback likely complete at that point, and then this then became our swing low whenever we got the pullback. Actually got a close below on the weekly. I don't think we did in the daily somehow, but yeah, that's a weekly boss. So then this became our swing high. You can see we mitigated this weekly supply, swept a nice bit of liquidity as well there behind that inside bar. So yeah, we'll just double check this close below. The low of that candle is 524 and the close of that inside bar is 517. So yeah, we just got the close below there, but obviously a very insignificant break in the weekly look. And then obviously pull back in to mitigate the supply at the extreme of the range, mitigated it. So yeah, very possible that the weekly low will be run. Right, so we'll drop down to the daily. Obviously, the two most recent breaks of structure there. See, that was swing low. Again here, if you want to map your structure more tightly, you could count that there as a pullback, and you could have had a bullish break structure there, but just sort of relative to sort of the most recent swings in price, like there, that felt pretty insignificant. It's pretty, I was viewing it as more of a consolidation, so I was happy to sort of stick to the larger swings. So then obviously I have another break structure here. giving us this, our daily swing high. Here, again, obviously we pull back in to mitigate the range. Just mitigated that little range. Unfortunately didn't mitigate the refined inside bar, but obviously we know it doesn't have to. Obviously again, probably pull back probably mitigated the EQ of the leg. Yeah, pretty much bang on. And this is where like premium versus discount is very valuable, because very often on the weekly and the daily, the EQ of the leg will be met in the pullback. So like if you're getting into buys down here, you can sort of reasonably target the EQ of the leg. And then obviously when you're getting in, if you get into any sells from here in the M15, you can be quite aggressive in anticipation of catching the start of this here, and maybe hold some value, or hold a small amount of volume to target the week low. So yeah, most recent price action, obviously we've mitigated this supply, which is probably again at the EQ of the leg. Yeah, once again mitigated the EQ of the leg. Had a bullish shock here, which can be a sign of bullish intent, but quite often a shock just leads to the mitigation of supply, sort of in the premium, the discount. So you can see here we had this little pullback section of price here. We didn't quite pull back to the EQ, so we sort of swept the low there. So that's your liquidity sweep in the daily. Again, a liquidity sweep in the daily can be a sign that something's about to change, and maybe you'd switch bullish, run that high, but again, that takes a long time. But obviously, after that liquidity sweep and the bullish chalk, I was sort of thinking the EQ of the leg hadn't been met. We had this sort of pretty clean flip zone. So yeah, it's pretty much thinking that it was very possible that we just mitigate this supply, or even the extreme, and continue bearish and run the week low. So that was sort of what I was thinking there. So now obviously we've been stalling in the, there's more sort of for heading into next week as well. We've mitigated the supply in the premium. Pull back into this demand, like you can see there, a huge amount of momentum, huge bearish engulfing candle, but pull back into the demand that caused the bullish chalk. So you can see it directly led to that there. So it would be no real surprise if we were to get a decent pullback from here. Particularly after a large sell-off, usually price does like to retrace to sort of fill up more orders in the sort of well-priced part of the range. So there is technically an eye chalk there as well, if you want to count that on the. It can be a sign of bullish intent, particularly on the daily. Like you know, an eye chalk on the M1 or even the M15 can be quite insignificant, but when you get to the daily, it can be useful information. So at this point, we're in this valid demand. We've had a bullish eye chalk. So at this point, I'd say next week it's quite likely that, having mitigated the supply in the premium and we're bearish overall, I'd say it's quite likely this is going to be run. But what might happen here is that we'll pull back into some supply here that'll probably be clear on the 4 hour and the M15, and then tank to run the week low. So I'm heading into next week, at the start of the week, probably anticipating maybe a pull back up something within here and then tank from there. But go to the 4 hour now, where it'll probably be clearer. So in the 4 hour, you can see we mitigated the daily zone. We've had you can see a lot of momentum in, sort of messed around for a bit and then absolutely tanked from there. So the two most recent breaks of structure were a bearish boss there. Again, that's your. That was inner swing high. That's a swing high because it's the highest point in the leg that caused this break of structure. So then obviously a bullish boss there, So the 4 hour is technically bullish, which is obviously counter to the daily. But again, what we understand with using multi-time frame analysis is that the higher time frames always take precedent. So yes, we switch bullish in the 4 hour here, but we mitigated this supply, which is in the premium of the daily leg. So it's very likely that the 4 hour only switch bullish to mitigate that supply, and that we're now going to basically continue the daily bearish trend, and probably the 4 hour will switch bearish in line with that. So you can see in terms of supply and demand here, this was an extremely high probability POI in my opinion. You can see it's a flip zone because it quite clearly flipped these wicks. Swept liquidity. Beautiful, like a huge wick there, which is exactly what you want to see, because clearly there was a lot of liquidity swept there. Like, it was a huge in and out move. Also, it mitigated this range. Just double check that the high of that is 301 and the low of that didn't actually mitigate that range. Right, that was a mistake on my behalf. But right, so we have that unmitigated range below, which isn't ideal, because obviously we can't come down there before we sort of potentially continue bullish. In terms of internal structure, that was the bullish most recent bullish IBOS. This was the bearish IBOS. Obviously huge amount of momentum as well. So obviously this is basically one big supply range. Within that, we obviously have the one very clear POI at the extreme. Nothing else massively clear within that. Obviously it's swept liquidity as well, just behind that minor high. So, and obviously it's a huge wick, so a lot of momentum coming to the market. There is also these little wicks, which you have to be aware of, because like when you see this sheer amount of momentum to the downside, it's very unlikely. It's possible the price will come up here, but when there's that amount of momentum, price doesn't have to pull back that deeply. So it is possible, like we've mitigated this range now, we've mitigated these little wicks that led to the IBOS, so it is possible we could tank from here in line with the daily. But equally, 4 hour is still technically bullish. Coming off this demand, we also had a IBOS here, just closed below those equal lows, which obviously I would like to have seen something more convincing, but it is valid. So this is a supply range as well. So I have no close above here yet, so just had a sweep. So it remains to be seen. We could tank from this supply, having basically we mitigated the previous range. So could tank from here, but if we get a close above here on Monday, which basically will be the bullish IBOS, then that's whenever you can sort of say with a fair degree of confidence that we might be coming up here. So you can look for buys on the M15, sort of. It's pro 4 hour, so it is pro 4 hour trend, but obviously it's counter daily, and we've mitigated the daily supply in the premium, so it is possible the 4 hour trend will fail, but you can sort of confidently look for buys to at least target that supply, with obviously the outside chance that we can run swing high as well, which I just mark on. So yeah, coming into Monday, 4 hour swing is bullish, coming off a high probability POI nested within daily. Like when price spikes that supply zone, technically order flow switch bullish. Personally, I would like to see a candle close above it, and then sort of pull it back in here, and then start playing that there on the M15. So yeah, it could go either way. We could see the pull back up towards here, or we could just tank from this supply. But yeah, it's an interesting juncture in the 4 hour. Obviously you have to sort of stay neutral. Let the M15 sort of internal trend, swing trend guide your thinking, and sort of understand how it relates to the 4 hour and the daily. So yeah, that's the 4 hour. I will go to the 15 now. So obviously the two most recent breaks of structure on the M15 are here. just got a candle close below there, which again isn't the most convincing break of structure. Ideally, you can see like we sort of swept it and then sort of ranged around for a bit, just closed below, but ideally, I still count it as a break of structure, but ideally you would have wanted to see it close below that wick just to sort of signal that there's, a decent amount of bearish momentum. So obviously that was our swing low. This is our current swing low. This was the swing high, as it was the highest point in the leg that caused this break of structure. Again, if you want to just use your box tool, you can see that's the highest point. So that's your bearish boss, and then that there is a bullish boss. So again, the M15 is now aligned with the 4R, which again is a sign that we can get a decent pullback, potentially up to the 4R supply, or potentially a continuation of the 4R trend. Mitigate. Yeah, you can see we initially reacted to this M15 inside bar. That caused the initial reaction. Obviously, nice demand zone nested within the 4R. A lot of momentum came into the market there. It's quite clear. In terms of M15, obviously had that zone there. Obviously, it's nested within the 4R as well. Just cover the wick just to be safe. So yeah, no surprise we've seen the pullback from here. 4R nested, M15 nested in 4R. Now, what is the expectation of this pullback? Well, 4R internal is still bearish. Technically, yes, we had a sweep of the high, which is obviously the break of structure here. So we could keep tanking, but now that the M15 is bullish, 4R swings bullish, coming off a high probability POI, it's very likely that we can start sort of looking for something like this in the M15 to at least target this 4R supply up here. So obviously following the break of structure, we expect a pullback. We've now pulled back into this inside bar. So again, use the EQ tool. Haven't quite reached the EQ of the leg yet, which isn't ideal, but it doesn't have to. In terms of supply and demand, what else do we have down here? This little sort of range, there's nothing massively clear engulfed within it, so that's where you can start looking like on the 10-minute or whatever to see if there's something. Yeah, you can see there's that candle there that gets engulfed sort of at the extreme of the range. Has a nice bit of inducement in front of it there. So yeah, personally I'll be inclined to just take the range there if we come down this low, to sort of be aware of it and then see what way price action sets up within it. What else is there? In terms of internal structure, the most relevant internal swing for me, sort of after a break of structure, you can sort of reset the internal structure, because quite often like an internal, when you get a swing break structure, it's going to be relevant for the M50 or for the internal structure as well. I think I initially had this here as the most recent IBOS, and obviously this here would have been a bullish IBOS, but like the bullish IBOS is pretty much the same as the internal IBOS is basically the same as the swing boss, so there's not much point in having that, whereas you can see we had a pretty clear pullback here. So that's the M15 IBOS, and then obviously we have this range. Also this sort of IBOS, so you can be aware of that too, which is obviously a little demand range, or supply range, sorry. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see if basically this little internal high holds and we tank, perhaps to mitigate sort of larger range below and the EQ of the leg, which, as we haven't quite mitigated the EQ, I'd say it's quite likely that we're going to continue lower from here. And then obviously we have this little range down the bottom where we can look for a continuation of the M15 trend. So yeah, coming into London, M15's bullish, 4R is bullish. Possibility to come London, the 4R will have such bullish as well, as we have wicked that high. So yeah, understand that higher time frames, daily's bearish, So it's very possible that ultimately the 4 hour or the daily trend will continue. But following this huge sell-off, usually price does retrace a good bit of that move, and we've sort of, while this was technically a boss, you could view it, you could argue it's not that convincing, so it could be a sweep of liquidity. So that could be what ultimately fuels the pullback. So obviously we've mitigated this supply here, or demand, so we could come in here on Monday and then sort of internal switch bullish and then start playing the internal. Yeah, just play the pullback like that there. That's my main thinking coming into next week, but obviously a lot can change in the M15 during Asia on Sunday night, Monday morning. So we'll post the markups on it in the channel, pre-analysis, so you'll sort of see what we're thinking coming into session when it's more sort of up to date. But yeah, daily bearish, 4 hour bullish, but quite likely that we will see a pullback. So that's EU. I'll now do AU. See the weekly. The most recent breaks of structure are obviously here. Here. Again, I map the weekly quite tightly because it just doesn't really make sense to me to have huge ranges when I'm sort of only holding trades for the short term, because obviously the weekly plays a long time, it takes a long time to play out. Obviously with sweep liquidity there, no close below as of yet. That obviously can be a sign of bullish intent, but again, quite often it's just that a temporary pullback before price does eventually run the week low, particularly when there's a lot of bearish momentum. Look to the left, or you're reacting to it, and yeah, you can see we got the decent pullback off those wicks. Now again, that's not something you would really be anticipating trading. You're not going to be down looking on the M1 for an entry from that weekly zone, but yeah, makes sense nonetheless. Obviously the next candle is these sort of, that's the next stop on the weekly, those sort of wicks there, so we might come down there before we see a bit of a pullback. Let's mark up the weekly. Obviously just missed this supply at the extreme. Just missed the supply at the extreme. Obviously did mitigate the EQ of the leg, which is usually what you're looking for. So it's obviously, it's very likely the pullback's complete at this point. You know, I'm not anticipating price coming back up here just to mitigate that supply. Obviously when you compare sort of previous breaks of structure like that, there's clearly a very bearish move. You know, every candle breaks the previous candle's low, minimal wicks. That there's the same. Yes, we got a bit of a flip from this supply, but a lot of bearish momentum here. Again, not as bearish as previously, but still quite bearish. And then this here has been quite, we had the initial bearish engulfing, and then it's been quite corrective down. So it is possible that maybe we'll see a more complex pullback from here following the sweep, but again, the weekly takes an awful long time to play out. In terms of supply and demand, everything here is sort of mitigated, except that's not even really, I wouldn't even draw that on really because it's not engulfed on them, but obviously there could be some supply there. So yeah, that's the weekly. Daily, obviously the most recent breaks of structure. Would have been there and there. Actually, it would have been there because. So just mark on my nice little dots. So obviously this here was basically all the daily pullback. Now, what's the purpose of the pullback? To pull back the value, so to the EQ at the leg at least, if not the premium. Right, so we've pulled back into the premium. What do we mitigate? Mitigated the wick. The wick is significant because it flipped that little inside bar, which is obviously a nice demand zone. Larger internal, I'm just inclined to ignore at this point because I think it's quite clear the smaller internal is playing out. So this was sort of the first sort of bearish eye boss on the daily, which gave us the that's our daily supply range. Then had another no so here obviously we had this demand at the extreme. It was valid because obviously it caused the bullish chalk. So no surprise you saw a bit of a reaction, decent amount of momentum there, but we got the bullish chalk as well. But obviously this supply range is pretty unmitigated, so the bullish chalk was in all likelihood just to mitigate something in that before continuing lower, which is obviously what's sort of happening now for a sweep of the swing low, which obviously isn't ideal. So from here, sorry, wrong one. So from here, yeah, it is possible sweep liquidity could fuel a higher move. Maybe we could see a bullish trend change, but obviously that's going to take a long time to play out. Have this supply here, obviously not the best because we haven't basically closed below this low, which is obviously also the reaction to this demand, so it'll be a flip as well, but obviously you can't say it's swept liquidity behind there. So yeah, what may happen is we may pull back into here before we tank lower and actually run the low. Obviously there is the outside chance that following sweep the low we could switch bullish, but that's obviously evidence bearish, so that's a lot's going to have to change for that to happen. So yeah, there obviously is also this minor little flip zone here. It's a flip zone because obviously it reacted to the demand within here. So yeah, could even just pull back in there and sell off. So yeah, daily bearish, pullback likely complete, having mitigated the supply and the premium. So I'd say it's only a matter of time until this week low gets run and we get the close below it and gives us the new internal range, or gives us the new swing range, which will obviously, that will be our new swing high. So yeah, main thinking for next week is just to look for sells to basically target more downside to get the close below here, either from this supply or this supply. 4 hour then. See the most recent break of structure. See, that was a bearish boss there. So then this was our bullish break of structure. So again, just as we went through on EU, we got the 4 hour bullish boss, but obviously this is our basically daily supply range. So although we switched bullish in the 4 hour, we understood the daily was heavily bearish, so it was always likely that we only switch bullish in the 4 hour to mitigate daily supply. Then we got another break of structure here. Interestingly enough, it looks like this supply might be failing. Not quite yet. But obviously, following the 4-hour break structure, we can expect a pullback to the premium of the leg, which is obviously there. So what do we have in terms of supply and demand there? I've been trying to ignore that wick because I don't think it reacted to high. If that's 934, the low of that candle is 935. Yeah, look, it's worth marking on. It's at the EQ. It could play out. It's not technically a flip zone in the 4-hour, but on a lower time frame it probably is. We obviously also have the extreme. Very nice POI swap liquidity. So this would obviously be the ideal mitigated this zone here. This was part of a supply chain in the 4-hour, which again is a very nice zone because it has all this inducement in front of it. So we've had the break structure possible. We could get a pullback into this sort of zone here, which caused the break structure because that's where basically this only wicked it, but then that candle is what basically caused the closure below. So in terms of internal structure, this is the most recent bearish IBOS. For me, I know that's the most significant pullback. So this is our 4-hour supply range. Everything within here is sort of mitigated. This was sort of the last unmitigated zone. So again, this zone hasn't failed just yet, so we could keep tanking from here. But obviously that's our bullish 4-hour chalk if we get if we get a wick above that high, and then obviously this being our protected internal high is the basically 4-hour IBOS, which will obviously give us even more confirmation that basically if you get an IBOS there, then we can more confidently start looking for buys up into the extreme. But yeah, obviously could keep tanking, but then following a boss, it's very possible that we can get the pullback up to here, or obviously the dream scenario is up to there. Yeah, so that's the 4-hour. Following the break structure can anticipate a pullback, but are basically waiting for the chalk or ideally the IBOS before looking to start playing the pullback. Understand that if we're taking buys in the M15 down here, you ideally want to manage aggressively up to here, and then get a lot more conservative in looking for buys, as it's very possible that we only switch bullish here to mitigate this. Again, that's your multi-time frame analysis, understanding how all the sort of time frames link together. I think that's evident on the 4-hour. So obviously we're bearish again. Yeah, that's the 4-hour, and then on the M15. See, this was a swing breaker structure, very significant pullback. So mark up the recent. I'd personally count that as internal structure. So the most recent bearish break structure was there. So obviously this is the 4-hour supply zone as well. So you can see we've literally mitigated the supply right at the extreme. So sort of we'll know coming to London, or coming to the desk on London on Monday, whether this held. Because obviously the expectation is that if the M15 trend is going to continue, that we'll run this low. But in terms of internal structure, quite clearly we have these two ranges being respected. So while the swing structure is bearish, the internal structure is clearly bullish for these sort of ranges being respected. So knowing that we've had the 4-hour break of structure, and that we can expect a 4-hour pullback, it would not be surprising at all to see price pull back into maybe supply within there, and then sort of that kicks off the pullback. In terms of demand, you could look for not the best POI in the world, but if you want to be aggressive, you could look for buys in there, but obviously a lot's going to change for Monday. So yeah, internal bullish, swing bearish. Following the 4-hour break structure, we know it's possible we'll get a 4-hour pullback, so it is possible that basically we'll get the close above here, and then we can start playing basically the M15 trend up to the premium of the 4-hour leg, which is obviously, I think that's the wicks at the premium at the EQ. So obviously if we can get in long from here following the break structure, then obviously decent risk reward, hopefully get some nice trades to take advantage of. Yeah, that's it with the M15 then. Obviously it's bearish, 4 hours bearish as well, so expect nowhere due a pullback following the break, following the 4-hour bearish boss. So yeah, just waiting to see what develops on Monday morning. You know, if we get the close above here, that's M15 switch bullish, and then we can confidently sort of follow the bullish M15 trend to basically potentially target the EQ of the 4-hour leg, which is obviously here at a minimum. So yeah, hopefully get some nice opportunities. Obviously pro M15 trend, hopefully counter 4-hour trend, so you have to manage slightly more aggressively. You can't just swing for the fences and target weak structure. But yeah, that's AU. Hopefully that helps you out. Hopefully you've learned something from it. If you have any questions, just tag me in one of the Discord channels, and have a good rest of the weekend, guys, and I'll chat to you soon.